Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Coming up on today's show, it's a time of peace in the New Republic. Grand Admiral Thrawn and Admiral Dalla have both been defeated. The Imperial Remnant has fled to the Galactic Core. Leia is elected Chief of State of the New Republic, and Luke's Academy on Yavin 4 is turning out the first members of a new Jedi Order. But not everything is bright for the New Republic. A darkness is growing in an area of space near the core worlds, and it could spark a catastrophe that will destroy Leia's government. It's Before the Storm by Michael P. Cubey McDowell, the first book in the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. And I'll talk about the book coming up in just a few minutes. But first, it's listener question time. Today's email comes from Soren, who says, "Hello, Aaron. I've been watching the podcast since episode 30 and have been consistently watching the episodes as they come out. My question is, who would win a game of sabacc between Han Solo and Lando Calrissian? I know Han won the Millennium Falcon from Lando in the movie Solo: A Star Wars Story, but I was wondering if he would win all the time, or would it be even?" Well, thank you very much for the email, Soren, and thanks for tuning in and telling me you're watching the show on YouTube. To answer your question, yes, we know Han wins a lot at sabacc, but in the movies and books, Han is usually portrayed as being really lucky. Do I think Han is good at sabacc? Absolutely. But I've always thought that Han is about the same level as a good recreational poker player in the real world. Lando, on the other hand, is a professional gambler. Playing sabacc is his job. It's how he makes and loses his fortunes. At the end of Solo: A Star Wars Story, when Han wins the Millennium Falcon, he figures out that Lando is cheating. He's hiding cards up his sleeve. Now, that's a really bad look for Lando, but I've never seen or read that Lando cheats at sabacc anywhere else. Listeners, if he has and I'm just forgetting about it, please email me, let me know. Anyway, Soren, I believe that Lando is ultimately the better sabacc player. Now, that doesn't mean he's always going to beat Han. I figure if the two friends played 100 times, Lando would probably win about 2/3 of the time, and Han would win the rest. Hopefully, if the Lando movie ever gets made, we see more of the gambler hitting the casinos, playing sabacc, and if Han shows back up in that movie and the two have another epic game, well, sign me up for that. Thanks again for the email, Soren. Listener, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer on the show, send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's book, Before the Storm by Michael P. Cubey McDowell, the first book in the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins on Yavin 4. Jedi Master Luke Skywalker is restless and weary. Luke is tired of being the galaxy's symbol of heroism, destroying the first Death Star, defeating Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine, defeating the Cyruvi invaders at Bakura, beating the mad Jedi clone Jerus Sabayoth, Grand Admiral Thrawn, the Eye of Palpatine. The list just goes on and on. Luke now understands why Obi-Wan and Yoda decided to live in isolation. Having everyone come to you to ask to help them with their problems is exhausting. Luke decides to turn command of the Jedi Academy over to one of his first students, Streen. He tells the former hermit that he won't be gone forever, but he's been having trouble hearing the will of the Force lately, and he needs to figure out why. Luke bids Streen farewell and leaves Yavin 4. On Coruscant, Leia Organa Solo is preparing for her first big diplomatic negotiation as the new chief of state. Leia is meeting with Nil Spar, the viceroy of the Yavetha, an alien race that lives in the Cornoct cluster near the galactic core. There are about 2,000 star systems in the Cornoct cluster, with 17 habitable planets and 6 sentient life forms. The Yavetha is the dominant one of those sentient life forms. Leia hopes to bring the Cornoct cluster into the New Republic to give the government a foothold in the core, one of the few areas of the galaxy where the Imperial remnant is still in control. But Nil Spar says the Yavetha just want to be left alone. The Yavetha ran the Empire out of the Cornoct cluster shortly after the Battle of Endor. Nil Spar says the only reason for his trip to Coruscant is to learn about the New Republic. Still, Leia believes there's a chance to reach an agreement with the Yavetha. Little does she know, Nil Spar didn't really come to the capital to learn about the government, but to try to tear it apart. Luke arrives on Coruscant and discovers Darth Vader's retreat. Luke invites Han to the former Dark Lord's lair, but he tells his brother-in-law not to bring Leia. When Han arrives, he asks Luke, why all the secrecy? And when will Luke answer Leia's request to start training their children? No, Luke says, Leia's a Jedi. She has the knowledge to begin their training. Luke tells Han about his desire to withdraw from society for a while. After Han leaves, Luke begins to meditate, but his session is interrupted when a woman walks right through his Force camouflage before Luke can even feel her approaching. She introduces herself as Akana, and she needs Luke's help. Luke starts to turn her away when Akana stops him. She's looking for her people, the Falanasi, with Force powers similar to Jedi. Akana says the Falanasi are masters of hiding. They went to ground during the Emperor's Jedi Purge after the Clone Wars. Akana says one of their members is Luke and Leia's mother, and she may still be alive. Lando Calrissian is bored, he's restless, and he's looking for something to do. Luckily for him, Admiral Hiram Drayson, the chief of New Republic's Intelligence Alpha Blue Division, has a job for him. Drayson is tracking an ancient vessel that keeps popping up in different places in New Republic space. He calls it the Teljkan Vagabond, after the system it just appeared in. Drayson wants Lando to join the military task force tracking the Vagabond and figure out a few things. 1. Where did it come from? 2. What's it doing? 3. What do its creators want? And 4. Is it dangerous? Drayson wants Lando to join the task force because Lando won't think like a military commander. He thinks like a smuggler and gambler. Lando jumps at the challenge to study the Vagabond. He borrows R2 and 3PO, picks up his old friend Lobot from Cloud City, and heads out to join the Teljkan Task Force. In deep space, a New Republic salvage crew discovers the wreckage of an Imperial Star Destroyer, and they discover something, a complete, undamaged memory core. When the core is sent to Coruscant, It lands on the desk of analyst Idar Nylakerka, who finds something inside. Information about the Black Fleet, a fleet of 44 Imperial Star Destroyers, including 3 Super Star Destroyers. Nylakerka runs his findings to Admiral Akbar. 44 Star Destroyers the New Republic hasn't accounted for after the Galactic Civil War. And the last place they were stationed? The Cornoct Cluster. Luke and Akana travel to the planet Lukazek to begin their search for the Falanasi. For a planet accustomed to space travel, Lukazek is pretty rustic. Luke and Akana rent an old-fashioned cart and travel dirt roads to the village where Akana says she lived as a little girl. There they find the homes in ruins. It happened during the Purge, Akana says. She finds a sign in her old house, hidden within the walls. Akana shows Luke how to see the message by looking through the walls, imagining that they aren't there. After a while, Luke finally sees the symbols, but he can't read what it says. It's a signpost, Akana tells him. It points to where the Falanasi fled after leaving Lukazek, to the planet Tyr. Lando's team arrives in the Telgcon system and meets up with the task force, commanded by a Hortek, Colonel Ijaga Pakpakat. It's clear that Colonel Pakpakat doesn't want to listen to any of Lando's ideas about the Vagabond, but Admiral Drayson's orders stand. The task force studies the Vagabond for a few weeks, much to Lando's annoyance. The gambler is impatient. He tells Pakpakat that eventually the colonel is going to have to approach the huge vessel. Pakpakat sends a probe toward the Vagabond. When the probe gets too close, the huge ship broadcasts a quick signal, and then, after a few seconds of silence, destroys the probe. Leia continues to meet with Nil Spar, but the meetings don't really go anywhere. In fact, Leia tells Akbar that the two of them aren't really negotiating about anything. It seems like the Viceroy just wants to chat. Akbar tells Leia that she must ask about the Black Fleet. What happened to those 44 ships? They're gone, Nil Spar says. They were destroyed when the Yavatha ran the Imperials out of the Cornoct cluster. Akbar says they need proof. He asks Leia to send the 5th Fleet to Cornoct. Leia refuses. Nil Spar says the Yavatha want to be left to rule themselves, and Leia won't insult them by sending a fleet of warships into the cluster. Eventually, Akbar gets Leia to agree to send the 5th Fleet to the nearby Farlax system under the command of General E10 Abbott. Akbar and Admiral Drayson tell General Abbott he may not be able to take the fleet into the Cornoct cluster, but he can still get eyes in there. Drayson gives Abbott command of a small squadron of New Republic survey ships. But Leia still has a bad feeling about sending the 5th Fleet to Farlax. She convinces Han to resume his commission, and General Solo heads out to join the 5th Fleet. Now, after the fleet leaves, Nil Spar contacts Enzoth, the Yavathan homeworld. The Viceroy says it's time to begin the cleansing. His generals acknowledge the order, and the Black Fleet begins to spread throughout the Cornoct cluster. C-3PO makes a discovery about the Telgcon Vagabond. The signal that the ship broadcasted is from the Kayla, a race that went extinct 150 years ago. But the signal was only the beginning of a message. It doesn't mean anything. Yes, it does, Lobot says. The ship is waiting for the second half of the message. Lando defies Colonel Pakpakat's orders and sets off toward the Vagabond. When Lando's team gets close, the ship broadcasts its signal again. Immediately, 3PO broadcasts a reply in the same binary signal, and nothing happens. The Vagabond allows Lando's ship to approach. General Abbott sends one of the New Republic survey ships into the Connacht cluster. The small 3-person vessel begins recording some of the lifeless planets inside the entrance of the densely packed star cluster. Suddenly, the vessel is slammed by a turbo laser blast. The survey ship tries to run, but it gets blasted again and again. Finally, it explodes, and the E10 patrol ship that destroyed it pounces on the debris. They send a signal to Nil Spar on Coruscant, with proof the survey ship came from the New Republic. Lando, Lobot, and the droids enter the Telgecon Vagabond, but the room is blank. There's no windows, no doors, nothing on the walls or the ceiling or the floor. Lando breaks out a torch and cuts a small hole in the inner wall that immediately closes back up. Strange. The ship can heal itself. It's partly organic. Lando tries to cut a larger hole and takes a quick peek inside. On the other side of the wall appears to be an enormous corridor. Lando gathers Lobot, R2, 3PO, and their equipment sled together. The plan? To cut a large hole and quickly enter the corridor. The plan works, but when the hole closes, the Vagabond groans. A spark of energy dances across the Vagabond's surface. Lando's ship is thrown away from the huge vessel. From his flagship, Colonel Pakpakat watches helplessly as the Telgecon Vagabond powers up and jumps to hyperspace. Inside the Connacht cluster, the cleansing begins. The Yavetha use the Imperial Star Destroyers of the Black Fleet to rain fire and destruction on the other inhabited worlds of the cluster. They land troops and burn villages and their inhabitants, exterminating the vermin and cleansing the lands with fire. Only the planet Polni resists. A Granin named Plat Malar escapes the massacre in a TIE fighter. Malar flees to deep space and tries to get a message out to anyone in range. The Yavetha are spreading throughout the Connacht cluster, and they are killing everyone in their path. Back on Coruscant, Nil Spar's ship takes off. The move stuns Leia, who thought she was making some headway in their talks. But the Viceroy was just playing with Leia. He never had any intention of entering into any agreement with the New Republic. And when he returns to the Connacht cluster, Nil Spar unleashes his true plan to bring Leia's government to its knees. The Viceroy issues a broadcast to the galaxy. He says that Leia plans to force the Connacht cluster to join the New Republic. In fact, she's already sent a fleet to the neighboring Farlax system and plans to invade. Nil Spar says that Leia has already ordered scout ships into the Connacht and shows the wreckage of the survey ship with the New Republic logo. The broadcast causes the Senate to erupt, with some of the senators refusing to believe Nil Spar's accusations, while others call for Leia's resignation. The story ends with Nil Spar offering the Senate a deal. He apologizes for the destruction of the survey ship and says the Yavetha will stand down and cease any further hostilities if Leia Organa Solo is removed from office. But if she is not removed as chief of state immediately, the new republic should prepare for war. It's time to take a break. When we return, I'll talk more about Before the Storm. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me take a moment and recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Thrawn Alliances is the story of how the Grand Admiral first met Darth Vader. The two team up to stop an Imperial threat on the backwater planet Batuu. The mission causes Thrawn to remember a trip he made to Batuu for the Chiss Expeditionary Forces, and Lord Vader reminds him an awful lot like a young Republic general he met there years before. Check out Thrawn Alliances by Timothy Zahn. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Today, I'm talking about the book Before the Storm by Michael P. QB McDowell, the first book in the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. I really enjoyed Before the Storm. I think this is the type of story that really kicks off a trilogy. This is a great beginning. It really sets up the three main storylines for this trilogy. It sets up Leia beginning her time as the new chief of state of the New Republic. She has succeeded Mon Mothma, her mentor, one of the people within the government that Leia has always looked up to. And one of Leia's first big tasks as the new chief of state is to host a series of diplomatic talks with the leader of a group of planets that border the core worlds where the Imperial remnant still holds power. The Cornoct Cluster is an area of space that is very densely populated with 2,000 stars, more than 20,000 planets. About 15 or 16 of those planets are habitable for sentient life. And in this system of space, 6 different sentient species have evolved. The dominant species is the Yavatha. The Yavatha are described as kind of a monstrous-looking people. They're a bit reptilian-looking. Not exactly reptilian, but a bit that way. Also a little skeletal. They have a dew claw that they can unsheath from their wrists. It's very sharp. In the beginning of the book, there is a flashback to a time right after the Battle of Endor. We learned that the Yavatha, while being a spacefaring people, are fairly new to traveling between the stars. When the Empire takes control of the galaxy, they set up a series of shipyards in the Cornoct Cluster. The Empire enslaves the Yavatha and uses them to help build their starships. After the Battle of Endor, the Yavatha staged their own rebellion in the Cornoct Cluster. They're a very intelligent people. The entire time they have been building these capital ships for the Empire, the Yavetha had been learning how to fly them, learning how they work. Well, they kill the majority of the Imperials at the shipyards and run any of the survivors out of the Cornacht cluster and grab control of the 44 capital ships that were patrolling the Cornacht or were in space dock, either being built or being repaired. This story takes place about 10 or 11 years after the Battle of Endor. The New Republic has seen other challenges to its legitimacy, most notably Grand Admiral Thrawn and Admiral Dalla. It's repelled each of them. And now it's a time of peace, but the Empire still has a foothold in the galactic core, and Leia and her military advisors see the potential of the Cornacht cluster being almost a perfect staging area for the New Republic if it needs to venture into Imperial space in the galactic core. However, the New Republic, they are not the conquerors that the Empire was. So Leia is not just going to send military vessels into the Cornacht cluster. She wants an agreement. Unfortunately for Leia, Nilspar has no intentions of entering into any agreement with the New Republic. The Yavetha simply want to be left alone to rule the Cornacht cluster the way they see fit. On one hand, I understand what Nilspar and the Yavetha are advocating for. However, the Yavetha's isolationist views don't really take into account the desires of the other 5 sentient species that evolved in the Cornacht cluster, or the few very small colonies of former Imperials that dot a handful of the other inhabited worlds of the Cornacht cluster. Most of the other habitable worlds are very sparsely populated. They pose no threat to the Yavetha or to anyone else. Much like the Yavetha, these people simply want to be left alone to live their lives. Now, I know what you're saying. Aaron, you always advocate for bringing the former Imperials to justice. You want to see the Star Wars version of the Nuremberg trials following World War II. And you're absolutely right. But to me, justice isn't the Yavetha showing up at these Imperial colony worlds and simply eradicating everyone. To me, justice is the Yavetha arresting them, either putting them on trial themselves for the crimes that the Imperials committed within the Cornacht cluster, or turning them over to the New Republic to try them for the crimes that took place during the Galactic Civil War. And that doesn't even take into account the other 5 sentient species of the Cornacht cluster. All they want to do is live their lives. They have nothing to do with either side of the Galactic Civil War. In my opinion, Leia's storyline, the politics behind the New Republic and the Yavetha, Nilspar basically running a feint trying to keep Leia and the New Republic distracted while the Yavatha start to spread across the Cornoct cluster. It was the most interesting storyline to me. The other storyline I thought that was really interesting was Lando and Lobot, 3PO and R2, and the Telgecon Vagabond. The ship has an organic quality to it. It can heal itself. It's very similar to the way the ships are described in the New Jedi Order series, the Yuuzhan Vong ships. The Black Fleet Crisis was published a few years before the New Jedi Order. So in the publishing timeline, this was the first time an organic technology had been introduced in this way. The Telgecon Vagabond is a puzzle. I like that Lando is the one sent on this mission. To me, Lando would be one of the characters in Star Wars that would enjoy this type of puzzle the most. The author shows us Lando's cleverness. He shows us Lando's intelligence. He comes up with different ideas than what the intelligence service who has been tracking the Vagabond comes up with. They think of the ship in terms of how it can be used militarily. What sort of risk does it pose? Lando and Lobot and the droids think of it in a different way. When they discover that the signal coming from the ship is from a long ago extinct species, the Kayla, they begin to consider that this is not a military ship. Maybe this is a funeral ship. Maybe it's a memorial. Maybe it's a time capsule. And in considering these different possibilities than what Colonel Pakpakat considers, Lando and his team are able to figure out what question the ship is asking when it broadcasts its signal whenever another vessel gets too close. A normal person cannot understand what the signal is, but R2 and 3PO can slow it down. They can break it apart. And 3PO discovers what the signal is composed of. When 3PO tells Lando and Lobot about the signal and that it seems to stop halfway, Lobot is the one that realizes that it's asking a question. It's hailing whoever comes close to it. It's protecting itself if you do not respond correctly. Now, Colonel Pakpakat is very cautious. He wants to continue studying the vessel because he doesn't know how dangerous it is. And let's face it, even if it's one of the things that Lando believes it to be, that doesn't mean it's not dangerous. It could have a self-destruct. But after nearly 3 weeks of just drifting along beside the Vagabond, Lando finally has had enough. And he gathers everything on the Lady Luck and heads over toward the Vagabond. When the ship blasts its signal, 3PO immediately responds, and the Vagabond allows them to enter an airlock. The only problem is, once you're inside the ship, everything is a blank. However, eventually, Lando cuts a hole in the inner wall, and once they travel through the hole, the vagabond gets spooked. And whenever the vagabond feels threatened, it either defends itself or it flees. At the end of the story, it jumps to hyperspace, taking Lando, Lobot, R2, and 3PO with it, and leaving Colonel Pakpakat and his troops in stunned silence. The third plot line in the story, in my opinion, is the weakest. It's the one where Luke meets Akana of the Falanasi. The Falanasi are a Force-sensitive group. They don't call it the Force. They call it the White Current. And Akana tells Luke that he and Leia's mother used to be a member of the Falanasi. She went into hiding when the group fled their homeworld during the Great Jedi Purge. There is a chance, Akana says, that their mother is still alive. This plotline has obviously not aged well. We learned in the prequel films that Luke and Leia's mother is Padme Amidala, a former queen and a senator from the planet Naboo. She dies giving birth to the Skywalker twins. One of the rules that Lucasfilm had for the Legends authors in the 1990s was that they had to avoid writing about things that happened prior to the events of A New Hope. Specifically, the events involving Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Emperor Palpatine. I have never heard that they were also discouraged from writing about whoever Luke and Leia's mother was. But I have to think that it was at least implied. I remember reading this book for the first time shortly after it came out in 1996. I remember initially being excited when Akana talks about Luke and Leia's mother. But even at that time, when we didn't know that we were getting the prequel films, maybe they knew within Lucasfilm by 1996, but the public at large did not know that we were getting the prequel films in 96. Even then, after my initial excitement faded, I thought, I'm not sure that this storyline is going to end with any answers about whoever Luke and Leia's mother is. I'm not going to spoil anything for those who haven't read the Black Fleet Crisis. I'm not going to spoil anything for the second and third books. But just know that even in 1996, going into this story, I was skeptical about where this storyline was going to go. But, again, as far as beginnings go, all three of these storylines set things up really well. If I had one critique, if I had one nitpick about this story, it's that there are a few scenes where Leia's characterization doesn't quite seem to fit the Leia that we knew at that time. Coming out of the original trilogy and the Legends books of the early to mid-90s, one thing you could always say about Leia Organa was that she's a fighter. She doesn't back down from a challenge. And there are a few times in this book, one time especially toward the end, where Leia seems uncharacteristically weak, that she's anxious or paranoid, that Akbar or Han or some of her closest allies in the Senate are not scheming against her, but don't have any confidence in her as the chief of state. I understand where she may not be fully confident in her new role, but it seems to me that most of those would be Leia's inner thoughts. There is a segment where Leia seems whiny. It's a handful of pages. It's probably 5 or 6 pages where she just seems weak, where she seems like she's afraid that nobody believes in her, that she really cares about everyone trying to scheme against her, even her closest friends and her husband. And to me, that just doesn't seem like the Leia that up to that point we had come to know. It's really the only thing in this book that I wasn't a fan of. But besides that, the book does a really good job of setting up the trilogy. Will the other 2 books pay off the setup? I guess we'll learn that going forward. Well, listener, it's time to go. If you have something that you'd like to share with me, a question, an opinion, a comment, you can send them to me in an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com, or you can send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And don't forget to send in your favorite Star Wars character groupings. I love reading the messages that you guys send in. Now, coming up on the next episode, we continue through the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy with book number 2, Shield of Lies, by Michael P. QB McDowell. You can look forward to that episode coming out on May 30th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Moats. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.